It's still Gilroy, you know, the old people that still live here still remember, you know, what it was like. It was easier. Life was a lot easier.
This was in 1969, and I remember it was mostly orchard, farmland, and I think the population was about 13,000. And I remember all the cherry orchards and all the other fields.
And prunes were #1 in Gilroy, boy. Without the prunes, you had nothing.
During the prune season, the apricot season, they would shake the trees very lightly to pick the fruit that was ripe, and they picked probably 2, 3, 4 times sometimes. So it was a long prune season, and usually that was in September. And I could remember a couple times that school didn't even take and start until prune season was over.
Start school when the prunes were done. The farmers had a lot of say, you know, because of the crops. You had to bring in the crops, and the families were there to help to bring them in. It was a country, little town. I still consider it that, you know, some, you know.
My name is Marian Niiyama. I was born in Santa Ana, California on September 18th, 1933.
My name is Irma Batrez. I was born in McNary, Texas, November 12, 1941.
My name is Marianne Colt Peoples, and I was born at the Wheeler Hospital on 5th Street, the old one, and I was born in March of 1943.
My name is Henry Coletto. I was born in Gilroy, California, July 12th, 1943. Been here ever since.
My name is Roger Santos. I was born April 8th of 1945 at the old Wheeler Hospital in Gilroy.
My name is Ermelindo Puente, Jr. I was born June 18th, 1946.
My name is Gene Sakahara. I was born in Fresno, California, and I was born April 6, 1948.
My father was born in Japan, in Fukuoka, which is the southern island which they call Kyushu. My mother was born in Santa Ana. They met at church actually because my father's father was a minister. He and my grandmother and my father immigrated from Japan to Hawaii because my grandfather was asked if he would take over a church in Hawaii. They moved to California, and my grandfather had a church in Southern California, and my father attended the church. They needed an organist, which my mother was at a different church. And so they asked permission to have her play the organ for my grandfather's church, and that's how they met.
My mother was Beatriz Talamantes. My father was Daniel H. Reese, Sr., and they came from across the border from Piedras Negras, Coahuila, Mexico. And it was during the revolution in Mexico, and the President of the United States offered asylum to families that were caught in the middle of the conflict. I asked him one time, how did you end up with Mom? And he says, well, I saw the oldest daughter. She was very tall and willowy with black hair. Era profesora. She was a professor, a teacher in Piedras Negras. And then I looked at Martina, and she had flaming red braids. And he goes, no, I don't think I want a redhead. Then my mom had black curls, and then her younger sister was too young. So he went after my mom, eventually caught her. But he had to struggle, I'll tell you. My grandfather was very old-fashioned. He asked for her hand in marriage, and he said, wait a year. He asked him the following year, and he said, I think you better wait another year. And by the third year, my mom says, if you don't elope with me, we're never going to get married, because my father will never let me get married. And so they eloped.
My mother was from Gilroy, but her family came from Canada. My father also was born in Gilroy, although he came from Modesto to start with. His family came starting from England and Massachusetts, and then ended up in the Central Valley. And then they bought a ranch here in Gilroy. The ranch was on Watsonville Road, across from Rocky Ridge Ranch, next to the Bickle Farm.
My mother was born and raised also in Gilroy in 1914. She was born here. And my dad actually came over from Italy when he was 3 years old, ended up in San Francisco, took and moved to Gilroy in about 1918, 1920. Basically, he took and did a lot of farming. In fact, he used to take and drive tractor right on Felice Drive out there where it was all vineyards there. And he used to tell me the story where he drove tractor 12, 14 hours a day for 10 cents an hour. Later on, he ended up meeting my mother here in Gilroy because he'd been working here in Gilroy for several years as a laborer or a farm helper or whatever.
My mother's from Lava Hot Springs, Idaho, and she came here when, in 1935 or so. And then my dad moved here in 1929, and then he came from Alviso. You know, back then, this is during the Depression, so people were, you know, they were poor, and my grandparents were just dirt poor, and so they used to farm the kids out. So my mother was living at the little grocery store where it is, this old Gilroy service now, that used to be Kincaid's. She was living there and working there, and then my dad lived, they had the dairy right on Pacheco Pass, and so my mother's cousin, Floyd, was living and working at the dairy because his folks couldn't afford to keep him either. So anyway, so he took my dad over to the little store to meet his cousin, and the rest is history. And when my folks moved to Gilroy, it was 3 years before Pacheco Pass was paved. So Pacheco Pass was dirt. But he used to talk about having to bring extra tires and tubes and patch kit and everything to get from there to Gilroy because the roads were horrible.
Well, my mom was from Piedras Negras, Coahuila, Mexico, and my dad was from San Luis Potosí, Mexico. They met in a small town called Piedras Negras. That's Black Rocks, but it was cold. It's right by the border. And then they met there, and then my dad's family used to come over to work in the United States. They go back by covered wagon back and forth. Then they got married at a young age, I guess, 15, I think. They moved to California. Then I was born. Then the rest of the family were born here in Gilroy. We had 6 brothers and 3 sisters. My dad and mom worked at Gentry's. He worked there for 50 years. So did my mom at the cannery.
My father was born in Fresno. My mother was born in Japan, Hiroshima, Japan, and she was a picture bride. They lived in Fresno, and my birth mother passed away 2 weeks after I was born. And so my father sent me to his brother and his wife to stay for a year, and then by that time he had remarried to my stepmother and then had moved to San Jose, and then in 1952 we moved to Gilroy.
The reason we had to leave Santa Ana was because of World War II, when the Japanese were interned in the camps. We went to Grand Junction, Colorado first because we were not allowed to come west. And from Grand Junction, we moved to California. When I went into camp, I was 8 years old. And I was very young, and I didn't understand the real reason or comprehend. I only remember what I saw and, you know, the activities that we were able to partake. We did have school. I just remember the friends that we made and, you know, the games and activities that we were able to do. My father was able to go out on seasonal leave because the farmers in Midwest needed people to harvest the crop. During that time, my father found a place for the family to live.
After the war, the Japanese Americans who, after they were incarcerated during World War II, then got to come back to their residence, but the residence no longer existed because they lost it all. So they were trying to eke out a living, and so from San Jose they moved to Gilroy because Driscoll was sharecropping. So there were about 7 to 8 families, and one of them was my father. They built the camp just on 2nd Street, south of the cemetery. So I remember as a child, they were all building the homes together, kind of like the old barn racing. My parents and the other 7 families grew the strawberries. We picked it, and I'm sure part of the profits went to the rent of the homes and to the land and to the water. My father branched out and left the sharecropping, and he and the Higashiharas, we moved out to Cruz Road, and then they leased land from Walt Matheson and grew cucumbers right off of Los Animas, almost where the hospital is. In between that, he bought a prune orchard on Buena Vista. We made money with the cucumbers, but lost it on the prunes.
We were in Dos Palos. They had just finished the prune crop there, and my mom's youngest brother, Abel, he was working at Spencer Cleaners, but he was renting a room at the Holloway Apartments. He told my mom, why don't you go look at it? You have a big family and you could rent part of the cottages. So my mom and dad went to see him, and she really liked him. It became a family home. I think we had like 14 rooms and then the cottages in the back. But as one of the siblings got married, they would pick their cottage or apartment where they wanted to live. They would pay rent. When they would started having kids, my mom was a babysitter, so it was the best of all worlds there.
The old ranch house that we took and lived in, we actually had a wood stove, so everything was cooked on a wood stove. The house was heated with the wood stove. We had electricity, but we also had, in the late 40s, early 50s, we had outside plumbing. So we just had we call a pit toilet that we had to take and go out to. The bedroom that I slept in, there was my other 2 brothers, and we took and had 2 beds. So I slept in bed with one of my brothers for a number of years. My older brother went off into the Air Force. I got his bed, so I really thought that was a big deal.
When I was 5, and I remember getting up in the morning and walking across the field and crawling through a hole in the fence and to go over and help at the dairy. I mean, I was probably got in the way more than anything, but because my folks had a dairy, so there was always plenty to do. So
We were on 7th and Rosanna, across from the police station there. There was a 2-story home. It was a neat house, but we lived in the basement. So when I went to kindergarten, I said, wow, they don't have a dirt floor like we do, It was weird, And then we first got, in the neighborhood, we were the first ones with electricity there. And then the water, my brother and I used to have these milk cans. We'd get 2 of them. We'd walk not quite a quarter of a mile to a little church, and we'd get water, and then we'd bring it home. So when we took a bath, we had these big tubs. You'd fill half of it with water, you start the fire, and then you have another tub with cold water, and then you put the hot in there so we had to take a bath outside, but because it was just the kids there, but it was different, things were different. Kids weren't spoiled. Torn your shirt, they could sew it, Yeah, just the way mom would make clothes, from the La Piña, it used to be the flour sacks. And that's just the way it was. I remember I had a pair of shoes and they had a hole. My dad had an old pair and he put the tongue inside so the water wouldn't, really get into me, to my foot. But I remember this one little girl, she was in school with no shoes, so I didn't feel too bad. I said, wow, it's pretty poor when you can't afford shoes, And I was just a little kid thinking that, and I just felt sorry for her. I said, wow, somebody always got it worse, than you do.
The first two houses we lived in, the plumbing was on the outside the walls because they were both had no indoor facilities at all. So, in fact, my grandfather never liked doing his business in the house, so he had a outhouse, and him and my dad both liked the outhouse, but I never liked the outhouse, mainly because of the spiders. In fact, my grandfather, when he built his new house in 1949, that he put a bathroom in the garage, so that was where he went, and he shaved and everything outside.
As a matter of fact, I was in the Army, and the sergeant told me, got a crew, and he says, go clean the commode. And I'm standing there, I said, meathead, don't you understand? I go, no, what's a commode? I said, we had an outhouse. Gee, well, you live under a rock, you know? But, you know, that's how you learn, you know. And then when you're in the jungle, there's no toilets. So, you know, I could live like that. These guys from the city couldn't. They were really just going crazy, but that's life.
We had electricity, and we had the old crank phone. Our phone number was 9F3, so you could pick up the receiver and you could hear somebody else on the party line talking.
So you'd be on the phone and your neighbor'd be on the phone too, tell you to get off the phone because they had to make a phone call.
Yeah, we didn't use the phone at all. We didn't. My mom maybe, or the dad, but not us. It was business and business only.
And then we had dial telephone. I think I was 10, 11, I don't know. One of my friends, we did nothing all day but call, talk a minute, hang up. And then we'd go away from the phone, and about 15 minutes later we'd go again, because, you know, that was new. It was like a toy that we could call our friends. Different.
And then in 1952, we moved to Capitola near Santa Cruz, and that's where I attended high school. In 53, I met my husband, and in 56, we were married. Then we left for San Francisco, where my husband was working. And then he was offered a job in Gilroy, and that's how we happened to move here.
And then my dad had the store. My dad had a friend, his name was Joe Longorio, and he had a butcher shop. So he bought him out, kept the butcher shop, and added a groceries to it. And it was a mom and pop store called Dan's Post Office Market, because we were right across the street from the post office. I went to work there because I didn't like housekeeping. The hotel was a 2-story, so it was my job to sweep and mop all the stairs going up. And I didn't like that at all. So I told Dad, please give me a job. And he did. So I was out of the house and working while I was in high school.
We worked out in the orchard. One of the orchards my father put in crab apples, but we had to mark out the field with him. So that was interesting to mark how far, was it 24 feet and 48 feet, and we would put stakes in and mark the fields. We moved out there when I was 5, so probably some of that happened when I was 8 or 9. And then my brother and I, as the years progressed, we moved sprinkler pipe. And of course, he drove the tractor. I only got to drive the pickup and the big truck between the rows of trees. My instructor in high school for driving told my father that I should not drive. But anyway, it was okay. I just dodged the trees. When the prunes came in, we would help to harvest the prunes, and also when we dipped the prunes into the water and put them on the conveyor belt, getting them ready to put it in the dehydrator, we did some of that.
There were a lot of long days out there. I probably shouldn't say this, but you had a choice. My dad always gave you a choice. You could either take and come out and pick prunes for the day, or you could take and sit in your bedroom. And I thought, well, that sounded a lot easier sitting in the bedroom. But after you sit in the bedroom for 2 or 3 hours, you decided it was a lot nicer to be outside picking prunes. And when you picked prunes, you had a box, what they call a box of prunes, and it usually held a couple of buckets. Normally we pick a ton of prunes, which is about 40 boxes a day. When we were doing farm type work. We had livestock, and so we had to take and, we had a couple of cows. I hate to say it, I didn't get the chore of milking the cow. My sister took and did that. She hated it because she had to milk the cow before she could take and run to get on the school bus every morning. So that was part of her chores, and I'd, feed the rabbits and chickens and things like that, help out with that.
Oh, criminy sakes. Everything from, feeding cows and calves, and my dad wouldn't let me start milking until I think I had to be 7. And because for some reason he picked that, when you're 7, I'll let you milk. So, but I did good in the dairy. I used to pull down 1,000 a day. No, you had to have a lot of pull to milk cows, yeah. Shovel cow manure, wash it, because the dairy you had to wash everything down every day, so. And cut hay, rake hay. We used to get up in the middle of the night because you had to have the dew had to be right. And we had a 4-man baler. It took 4 people to run it. And my sister used to poke, and my mother used to tie, and my dad, you had to have a guy up on top of the baler that had a platform there, and I drove the tractor, and so it was a family operation. I don't remember doing anything that I didn't enjoy doing. I mean, and then like in between milkings, milking, it's a twice-a-day job. So anyway, so we would play horseshoes, and sometimes we'd go fishing in between milkings and whatnot.
And the games we played, we hide and seek because we had a lot of open land. We could run around, rock fights, and then my brother and I, we'd get an old rim from a bicycle and take the spokes out. We used that for a basketball hoop. We didn't have a ball, we'd shoot with a can, something better than nothing.
There were times when we weren't picking strawberries that my brother and I would take the strawberry crates and build forts. And this one time we built a tall fort with kind of a tunnel maze in there, and it took about 4 hours to build this thing. And then finally, he said, "Okay, follow me." So he went into the tunnel and I followed him. And I'm in the middle of this stack of strawberry crate fort, and I hear this rumble. And before I could do anything, he had pushed it down, so hundreds of these strawberry crates collapsed on me.
We used to go to Glens Creek, which is now by the park, off of Miller. We used to go catch pollywogs, pretend we were fishing for fish, and we would just play in the water. As we got older, and we met all the different neighbors, we would all play in the street and ride bicycles and kick the can and whatever. But as soon as it started getting dark, and we heard my mom said, "Come home," everybody would scatter and go to their respective houses.
We played in the orchard, and we made up games and things like that. One time we said we were bored, and my father said there's a whole shop out there with hammers, nails, and other tools. You go out there and you just build something. Don't tell me you're bored. We used to play Monopoly and Scrabble, and we had jigsaw puzzles that we always worked with. Oh, and we read quite a bit. And so we would go down to the old library where the museum is now, and then my brother and my mother and I would collect our books, and we would be gone for about 2 weeks, and we would come back to town because it took us 15 minutes to come to town.
As far as playing games, we played a lot of baseball. We had some big open fields out there, and we had 2 or 3 neighbors there, so there was like 5 of us. So we take and play baseball and football, and my dad took us a lot hunting and fishing. We did a lot of local hunting here for deer and quail and things like that were on the ranch or in the farm area there. So it was mostly just outdoor type activities.
Oh, we played dodgeball, jacks, marbles, tag. It's just games that children played there.
There's an old sycamore tree out there, and we used to play marbles around that tree and play the usual kinds of dodgeball and softball and things like that.
And when it got dark, it was time to go to bed. We usually went to bed, at 7 or 8 o'clock because we were up the next morning at, 6 o'clock or whatever to do chores before we went to school.
Oh, my mom was, she was such a terrific cook. 2 of my brothers were in the National Guard, and they would during the holidays, invite all their friends from the National Guard to come over and have a feast of tamales and beans and rice and salsa, and they look forward to that.
I have a real good friend, and we'd always take and compare each other what we were eating at home, and he'd always take and eat pasta because he was an Italian and I was Italian. We ate very little pasta. We ate a lot of meat. We raised rabbits, we raised chickens, we raised beef. So I hate to say it, I probably ate steak 3 times a day. You know, it seemed like where a lot of other families didn't have that option, but we lived on the farm and we raised all those animals that were there and utilized them.
Mac and cheese and Swiss steak and roast, stew in a pressure cooker, that now that pressure cookers are on the market again, they're more refined than what we had, but you were always afraid that it was gonna blow up.
Yeah, they did all the cooking because we didn't go out, you know. The big family, you can't go out, you know. She made tortillas every day. We had no bread, 0 bread. So we had tortillas and beans. Basically, that was the meal, you know. We had some spaghetti.
Oh, she baked her own bread for years, and then I remember her fried chicken. When she was baking bread, my favorite was she used to make, they were a flat donut, but I mean, she used to deep fry them. But anyway, the bread dough, and that was with butter and sugar, was to die for. So.
My mother, we had a big garden, so she did a lot of canning. She used to take and can a lot of apricots. We had a couple of big blackberry patches where she took and picked blackberries and would freeze those and take later on and make blackberry pies, apricot pies through the winter time and so forth. So those are some of the best times that I remember about my mom. She was a great baker.
She made homemade rolls and bread and obviously cookies. So we canned fruit and we made jam. So we had fruit and jam all year long.
When I take my tortillas to school, I kind of be a little ashamed, but then the kids, hey, we'll give you a bologna sandwich. Boo, right now, boy, I take that, you know, it was pretty neat for me. I was high stepping then.
My dad, every single morning, would get up, make a pot of oatmeal, a pot of coffee, and a pot of cinnamon tea. He did that every morning religiously. I would get ready, he would get ready, and he would walk me to school.
I started out at Elliott at kindergarten, and then I was in San Ysidro to the 5th grade, and then they put me in St. Mary's against my better judgment. But
then we moved out to the ranch, so then I went to Adams School until 7th grade. Adams School is where Tic Tac Park is. And we used to play on the big rock that's there. We used to play on that. And at 7th grade, one of those dreams that you have sometimes, oh, I have a paper due and I don't think I'm gonna get it done. What if the school burns down? Well, the school did burn down.
I went to Jordan School before they tore it down. I went from kindergarten to 4th grade, and then they sent us to Glenview when it first opened up. I went to kindergarten because I stayed back because I didn't know a word of English. Growing up like that, because there was no bilingual, you know, if you didn't know English, boy, you were a cooked duck. But you picked it up, my sisters picked it up, and then I was picking it up as I went, you know.
I didn't know English, but I had a friend that taught me, and I had a very good teacher, Sister Mary Attracta at St. Mary's Convent. It was great.
nuns were really strict. Back then we had one lay teacher and the rest were all nuns. It was good. You learned a lot of respect at the Catholic school. But I remember other kids getting smacked around, but I never did. Yeah, so mainly I was scared of them. So.
I went to Jordan School up until 2nd grade. Then my father raised strawberries on Cruz Road, and then we lived there until I was 6th grade. Then he purchased the prune ranch on Buena Vista, so then I went to 7th and 8th grade at Rucker School. Now the irony is I became the principal of both San Ysidro and Jordan, where I went to school as a child, and ironically both schools are now closed.
I ended up, like you say, going to Jordan School, went to Brownell during my during the 7th, 8th grade, and then went to the Gilroy High School and graduated from Gilroy High School.
Went to high school at Gilroy High.
And Gilroy High, that I went to school with was where South Valley is, and we were the first class of 61, was the first class to start as freshmen there and finish.
And my sister was the school secretary there and was the secretary for 42 years. So we always joked as part of the family. She outlasted 11 principals and 7 superintendents.
Mostly in high school, I was pretty athletic. I ran track, lettered my freshman year as a varsity runner, and then I wrestled 4 years. I played football 2 years.
When I got in high school, I played football, baseball, and wrestled. And I never played basketball because I couldn't jump. But anyway, that's a joke there. And the main reason I like wrestling because you got out of school during school to go to the wrestling meets. So I like that. So anything I could do to get out of school was.
I liked school mainly because that meant I wasn't in the fields picking strawberries, hoeing weeds, weeding, picking prunes, all that stuff. So it was very interesting because I went to small elementary schools, Jordan School, San Ysidro School, and Rucker. So it was the same class every year, right? And so we had the same friends. So when we got to Gilroy High, I said, whoa, this is big. And now we had to switch classes and different kids in different classes. So it was a bit of getting used to as a freshman. I was elected the senior class president. And I remember Roger Anderson, our counselor, said, by far, this is the worst class that's ever gone through Gilroy High. And we were known as the Rat Packs because we just had a bunch of hooligans.
When I was in high school, the girls would come in and go, Marianne, your father's here. And I said, well, how did you know my father's here? Well, they would say, nobody else's parents come and pick them up with a tractor and a trailer and a truck. So I would say, well, at least I don't have to walk 10 miles home.
I took a bus to school, and living out on Day Road, which is now Santa Teresa, we'd have to walk from Day Road to Santa Teresa because that's as far as the bus would come out. It wouldn't come out on Day Road. So we'd have to walk out that far. It was about probably, I don't know, 3/4 of a mile, maybe a mile.
And then there was David and Art Lewis, and they used to drive a farm-all tractor to school. I remember seeing them when I was going to St. Mary's, them driving, one would drive and the other would stand behind the seat, but they would drive the tractor to high school.
I learned to drive when I was in high school. My brother actually taught me how to drive. At that time, we didn't have to go to driver's school.
I never remember not knowing how to drive. Well, I knew how to drive well when my dad bought his '53 Chevy pickup, and I was 8 then. We had a pillow underneath and a pillow in the back for me and then you'd hang onto the steering wheel and stretch your leg as far as you could to push in the clutch.
My father was partial to Studebakers, and he bought those from Jack Ronald. And in fact, our pickup truck and the big truck was Studebaker also. And so we would go to town in the car.
Downtown was just what it was. It was a town. Now it's a city. Downtown was basically one street, and it was probably, I'm going to say 1/4 of the length of what it is now.
Everything was kind of between 6th and 3rd.
And it had several little side streets where people took and lived in, the old, what they call the old part of Gilroy.
And then there was little houses, all kinds of little shacks for people who couldn't afford a lot. And George Emilius had a house there because he lived out on the Cañada. But he come over here and he had his house in town when he got, I guess, too drunk to go home, so he'd just stay there. But it was beautiful.
Oh, criminy sakes. It was nice. I mean, because everybody knew everybody,
People were very, very, very friendly, welcoming, and it got to a point where it was like everybody knew each other, and it was just a friendly, friendly town.
Downtown was thriving. We had dress shops, we had grocery stores, we had pharmacies.
There was just a lot of small shops in town. I guess there was a lot of small businesses that people ran. There weren't any really big box stores and things in town.
And we could find everything that we needed, and we tried to find everything we needed because we didn't really want to go up to San Jose.
And we had JCPenney, that was the only place to shop. Bank of America, that was the only bank in town. We had Pollyanna Bakery, Ladies Toggery, which they sold hats, if you can believe, just hats. They had Woolworths, and they had Wentz Drugstore.
Living in the country, we came to town in Gilroy probably once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, just to take and buy groceries. And it was kind of a treat. There were, a couple places that we'd always take and come to on Sunday. We'd come to what they call Wentz's drugstore. And it was actually a soda fountain. So my dad would stop there and he'd always take and buy us an ice cream cone. And you could get a single deck cone for 5 cents, double decker for 10 cents. He'd always make us sit in the car because he didn't want us getting out and causing any commotion in the drugstore there.
I remember JCPenney's, Rizzuto's, Mr. Art's, Dick Bruin's, Milady Bruin, Ford's, and Montgomery Ward.
I could go into one of the pharmacies, Johnson's drugstore, for example, because that's where we picked up our medications. We could go in there, and if you didn't have enough money to pay for it, he would say, oh, well, next time you're in town, you just come by and finish paying for it. Not a problem.
I remember my dad talking about never having to carry a wallet because everybody had a charge account, everybody paid their bills, so it was all good, But Jim's I remember the most, and that's where I got my hunting license, and Jim was just a great guy, so.
We'd always go down Sunday morning to Brazzoli's Bakery and take and buy bread there. They also had lunch meats there, a lot of Italian stuff that they kind of imported and so forth. So that was kind of a spot we went to.
And the Milius, I remember, was you could see the Milius because it was so big, but it had lights on the outside, bulbs, hundreds of them on the outside on top by the roof. And then by the windows, they all had giant fish tanks. So you'd walk by, you could see the fish and stuff, and then people would go in there. Paul's Trading Post was still around, and the old jail was, they were changing over to the new one, but it was, the old jail still there where Old City Hall is.
Old City Hall, it really was, because you had the judge there, the sheriff, the jail, you had the mayor, the city council, everything was right there.
Went to the local Strand Theater there. Mostly what I'd always like to see were Western movies. So anytime it was a good Western movie, we try to take and see that. But again, that was kind of seldom. Maybe we go to the movies once every 3-4 months.
Strand, I remember, yes.
The Strand was pretty neat. It was fancy for its time.
Oh, the Strand, yeah. That's ironic about the Strand, because on Wednesdays, it was my job to take my mom and my aunt to the Spanish movies on Wednesdays. And now that we have such a high Hispanic population, we have no theaters that show Spanish movies, but then we did.
I remember being in a dance group, and we did our recital on the stage at the Strand, because that was the place to go. It was a theater, and our parents were out in the front of it, but you felt very important because you were on stage. Everybody wants to be on stage at one time or another.
You could go to the show with a quarter and get in and still have money for candy, because it was if you're gonna splurge, you'd buy a 10-cent candy, but most of the time it was nickel candies, but.
Oh, well, that was Saturday afternoon, 25 cents. We had 25 cents, and I believe it was 20 cents for the movie and 5 cents you could get a candy bar or popcorn, and we'd go to the movies and spend the afternoon, because you go to the movie at 1 and it would be over about 5 o'clock, because there were 2 films and a newsreel and cartoons, and the Strand had the balconies, they had the loges, and then the loges were in the back. And when we went on dates, we got to sit in the loges.
I think my first date at the show was with Patty, Felice, Little John, and All the nuns are dead now, so I can say that, because we weren't allowed any mix, boy, girl, anything. So Patty and I went to the show. She was a year older, because I always liked the older women. Anyways. But yeah, I remember I was trying to figure out how to get my arm around her. So we were sitting right in the very back. I couldn't afford the loges yet, but it was like one of those. But anyway, Patty still remembers that.
Then Jack Peters was a classic individual. He owned it, and finally he hired me to clean it up, and I get to go in free. So I figured out, well, that was a good deal while you're enjoying the movies anyway,
Later on, there was a drive-in theater that came out here, and just as a side note, I remember my mom had stick a couple of us kids in the trunk back there so they wouldn't have to take and pay for us to get in. I don't know, it was probably 15, 20 cents to take and get in. But money in those days were hard, and 20 cents was 20 cents. When we got into the theater there, they let us out of the trunk and we watched the movie. So there were some fun times.
We had a really nice rodeo here at the Gymkhana grounds. The Gymkhana was the best.
That was a big thing when they had the Gymkhana. Everybody from Gilroy, I think, took and attended that to watch people, ride their horses and the bulls and bucking horses, and a lot of fun, especially when you were a kid.
It was basically the community coming together again. It was a celebration.
My sister Betty and my grandfather used to ride their horses from town and ride in the Gymkhana parade.
I remember back in the day when the old Gymkhana ground, where they had it over here, that must have been 300 to 400 horses. It really was big.
I used to do volunteer work for Gilroy Foods, and then they asked me if I would operate our stand at the Garlic Festival. So I said, only if I can do what I want to do to it. I want to paint it, I want to do this, I want to do that. They said, go ahead.
Well, I've worked at the Garlic Festival all but one of the years. I sold corn on the cob for El Roble School. I worked in the finance trailer, which was a cushy job because it was air conditioned. One friend was in charge of the music, and so you had to take the musicians to different stages. And I was entrusted with a golf cart. It was kind of interesting because that was not too safe to ride with me. But anyway, they managed to get where they were going to go.
Very first one, yeah. I had a couple of refrigerated trucks, so my trucks were the first refrigeration they had at the first Garlic Festival when it was out south of town there at Harry Marx's place.
I did the Garlic Festival 30 years, volunteer with the Hispanic Chamber, and going here, going there, and working all the organizations through there.
I started volunteering for the Garlic Festival, and then I was elected vice president, become president in '91. Sam Boza, I worked with Sam. Sam and I became such close friends, and then after our presidencies were up, he says, what are we gonna do now? So he says, you and I both like to cook, so maybe we ought to do some cooking demonstrations. And that was the start of the Sakahara team. We didn't know what the heck we were doing, so we just bantered back and forth. Well, people liked it, and we've cooked now 30 years. I never had any ideas about what I might be, but Chico State was known for their educational department, so I became a teacher. And there was an opening at San Ysidro, where I went 3rd through 6th grade, and then now was teaching 6th grade there, and I taught 6 years before I was appointed the principal for another 6 years. While I was principal there, we celebrated the 125th anniversary, and noteworthy people such as Charlie Goopser, who became congressman representing Gilroy, graduated from that school as well.
My husband was offered a job, and then I was able to find a job at Wheeler Hospital, and that's where I continued working. The original hospital, of course, was smaller, and of course the staff was smaller, and it was like a family, so everybody knew each other. It was nice. I enjoyed it.
I went to school in San Jose at the Academy of Business. I went and applied at 3 places: the Cannery, Gentry, and Gilroy Foods. And Gilroy Foods called me in the evening at 6 o'clock. And they said, "Can you come to work?" And I go, "When?" And they said, "Right now." And then from there, my old boss moved to a manager of packaging department. And then he asked if I might be interested in going into management. I would be the first woman to go into management in a supervision position. And so I came home and I talked about it with my husband, and he told me this, which convinced me. If you don't take it, they won't ever offer it to you again. If you take it, you'll be opening doors for other women to follow.
I went to Hartnell for 2 years, and then Fresno State, and then I got my master's at San Jose State. David was working for Standard Oil in San Jose. Standard Oil was going to move to Oakland, and we had toyed around being entrepreneurs, so we decided to open up the Nimble Thimble. The day that they called David in to ask him what his plans were, "Here's my business card." And that started the Nimble Thimble.
When I was in high school, I was a senior in high school, they had what they call a career day. So they have a fireman come and a police officer and somebody from ranching or farming and so forth. And I was one of the, I guess probably the only person, I don't know why I was selected, but the local paper was there, and so they interviewed me, and I still had that little piece of paper there, and they asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I ask kids that all the time today when I'm working with kids, what do you want to do when you grow up? And so I wanted to either be a deputy sheriff or I wanted to be a game warden. So I ended up actually working for the sheriff's department as a game warden. So I always thought that was a pretty cool ending.
What did I do after high school? Worked. I couldn't wait to go to work. I was a real stupid kid. Well, I used to love to haul hay. So I used to haul hay in the summer, and my goal was to make enough money during hay season that I could take the rest of the year off. But I was never built that way. So as soon as hay season was over, then I used to go back and work for Topper, or I went mechanic. And so I did that for 34 years. And then I broke my back in 1995, so that took me out of that totally. And I couldn't, 50 years old with a bad back, I couldn't even buy a job because of workman's comp. I had to start another business. That's how I got started in the tractor business. And I've been doing that ever since 1996.
Well, after graduation, I didn't do much. I worked at Gentry's for a while, and then I said, I'll never go to college. And then, well, Vietnam says, you're coming with me then. So I ended up going to Vietnam was in for a year though. I was over there in combat and stuff. And then coming back from Vietnam was tough, having PTSD and stuff. It's just, you're in your own world, basically. You're not with, your friends aren't friends no more. They are, but they're not, because they're not connected with you, because you can't relate to nobody, only to a soldier that's been in combat. As far as I'm concerned, you can talk one-on-one with them, but guys getting killed and whatever you did to do, the demons are with you all the time. But you can survive, and then I ended up working for, like I said, Santa Clara County, and I got on with them, and I ended up staying there 40.7 years.
For advice for young people today is to talk to the people around you, to listen to what they have to say, put your cell phone someplace else, and enjoy just being with each other.
Be involved with your community, because there's an old adage, when you give, you get. And I think I've gotten much more than I've given in the city of Gilroy, community of Gilroy.
Go to school. I'm still working because I didn't go to school, you know. And most all the mistakes I've made in my life that cost me a lot because I didn't have any education. You know, so.
Stay in school. School, school, school. Without an education, you got nothing. If you don't realize what the old timers went through, you'll never catch it. You got to pay attention to what the old timers went through, how they solved problems. You know, it's not easy, but you got to solve problems and pay attention and save. You can't just, when you get $1, you spend it. You know, it doesn't work that way. You got to be, you know, smart and save your money and pay attention to detail.
The best advice that I take and give kids out there is to take and, you know, be persistent in what you want to do. You know, if you want to be a park ranger, you got to take and start off and work as a seasonal, a part-time person. Maybe you've got to go out and work on a farm just to get some experience to take and move up that ladder.
My advice to them is patience and communication with their parents, because parents have the knowledge of what's important in life, and I think they should learn what is really important in life.
There was only 4,000 population when we moved here. So it's been by bits and pieces, but it's grown and grown and grown. So you have to get involved with it. If you want change to happen, get involved. Don't wait for someone to cajole you or ask you. Have a vision of what you want in the future, because you're the ones that are going to inherit all this.
And that's what Gilroy offers, is not only the roots, but you get to know people. The old families here, everybody knew everybody. And then you learn to get involved and give back to your community. And so my kids benefited from that, and now my grandboys get to benefit from that. And my boys are always saying, "Pop, you know everybody." It's not that you get to know everybody, it's a privilege because you get to do things with them, socialize with them, raise money with them, coach them, do everything with them, and that's getting to know people.